And welcome to All Things Conflict with me, Maria Arper, hosting as usual. God, you'd be surprised if it was someone else, or maybe you wouldn't actually. Anyway, today's episode, I've invited someone called Issy Adamopoulos, and Issy is a mediator and has been called to the bar. And she's taken a particular interest in the criminal justice system and has written two dissertations on institutional racism in the justice system and institutional misogyny in the justice system. I think Izzy is going to go far, and I'm really welcoming this conversation. So let's begin. Wow, Izzy, how lovely that you've come to have this conversation with me. I mean, we only met a short while ago. I think we were introduced because of our mutual interest in mediation, and I think you are a mediator. And when we were talking, I understood that you wrote a dissertation on the criminal justice system, which was absolutely riveting for me. And being that this podcast series is called Justice Redesigned, I thought it might be a great opportunity for you to share your work and your findings and your passion and your interests, because you've also been called to the bar. Maybe you could just, introduce yourself for us.
Thank you so much for having me. Such an honor. So I was called to the bar in March this year, and I did a dissertation for my master's in law, which was conjoined with the bar course. And I also did a dissertation for my undergrad in law, both to do with the criminal justice system. But yeah, really what I want to do is mediation and peaceful solutions, as you put it. What I found really was that the penal system just isn't working the way that the majority of people think it is, unfortunately. And I think everyone has a very different view of what justice is. So of course it's supposed to deter against crime, but really I think it's more just punishing people for so much of what is actually wrong with society. And I personally believe that we can't be punishing people for ways that they have reacted to unfortunate circumstances. I don't think it's for the government or for anyone to really judge how someone responds to a unique situation. So even though my first dissertation was on institutionalized racism in the criminal justice system, and my second dissertation was on institutionalized misogyny in the criminal justice system, I think both findings together was, sort of that the criminal justice system is sort of failing us all.
Wow, gosh. Obviously, you've ticked all my boxes for a conversation and the starting point for a conversation. Um, and I'm just trying to work out where to begin. I mean, we've got the institutional racism, the institutional misogyny, and I definitely want to touch on those things. And then I'd like to also start on this idea, as you so eloquently put it, we can't punish people for failings in society or failings in the context of their lives. And that's really interesting for me because I know that was probably going to provoke a few people. Bad people need to be punished. And we love this word punishment in our society. And that brings me in two places that I'd love to just open up with you. And the first one is, what do we mean by punishment? Is punishment taking someone's liberty away? Is that the punishment that we say society needs to feel safe? And with you around and the things that you've done, regardless of the context, people don't feel safe. So we are going to remove you from society. And that's the punishment. Or is the punishment, we're removing you from society, we're going to dehumanize you, take away your entire identity and crush you as a person?
Mhm.
So that's sort of my first question, which is obviously very loaded from work I've done in prisons. And then the second part of that is when we talk about we can't punish people for the failings of society. failings of government, failings of our statutory systems, which I wholeheartedly agree with. But I think what we have to open up is then how do we address the injury, loss, or harm, and hold accountability and responsibility when people do things that create injury, loss, or harm, and then, you know, kind of in brackets, and let's not forget there are lots of people creating injury, loss, or harm that are nowhere near the criminal justice system.
Hmm.
So that was a bit of a sort of, that was a bit of an avalanche, but I'd love you to pick the bones out of that.
Yeah. So with regards to your first question, like what punishment is, you said, is it sort of taking someone's liberties away? Um, and I think it's almost that is separate from, well, this person is a danger to our society and we can't have them around. Because that argument, we can't have them around, you can put them elsewhere and you can re rehabilitate them. You don't actually have to take away all of someone's rights to get them out of society. As we know in Scandinavia, they do it really well. You know, they're not being completely dehumanized, yet they're still being excluded from society for a period of time. So I think we can achieve safety for the public and make people feel better that they're not just like living with murderers on their same street. We can achieve that without taking away someone's human rights. Um, but punishment more broadly, I'd say it's really for the victims or the victims' families, because I understand. I mean, when I speak to people about this who aren't really on the same page as me, they often say, well, you know, what if it was your family member who was murdered? Wouldn't you want to see that murderer, you know, killed or imprisoned? And I completely understand the sentiment of that. Of course, like I want that, but I think as a system, we have to go further back. Like, what is punishment achieving? And there have been so many studies to show that the worst people, the worst people are treated in prison, the worse they are when they're out of prison. Um, so it's not actually working to punish people, that it's not rehabilitating them, it's not stopping crime, it's actually furthering crime. So I guess it's how high do we put on the pedestal like the sort of satisfaction victims get from punishment? Should that be such a high priority if it's actually more damaging in the long run? I don't know if that answers your question
Yeah,
completely.
it's lovely. I mean, and you brought, you know, you brought in all importantly victims, victims' families, um, and interestingly enough, in all restorative work, and when you look for a restorative lens, victims pay attention to three questions. And the first question is, you know, why did this happen? You know, or why me? You know, why? Why has this taken place? And the second question is, why now? You know, why at this particular moment? And the third question, which is comes when people have got over the shock and the anger and the upset, is how do we stop this happening to anyone else?
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
I think we deprive people of that.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there's this amazing documentary, I wish I could remember what it was called. But it's about a man who lost his children in a drunk driving accident, and another man had taken the children off his life because he was drunk driving. And he actually went to prison to speak to this man, and it
Mm.
was like the most heartwarming thing ever. And the guy who lost his children said, you know, like, I forgive you. And the drunk driver said that that is, you know, his guilt of what he did is punishment enough. And having that conversation, I think, is so, so, so important. And I think we need to humanize it again, because people say, like, oh, you know, criminals, they have no humanity whatsoever. Well, then let's bring humanity back. Let's open up a conversation. Let's figure out why, because that's how we're going to get to the root problem, right?
Absolutely. Let's bring humanity to situations where there is none. And I suppose there was one thing that I just want to sort of test with you, really, and it's something that I pick up a lot on when we talk about, you know, people taking other people's lives, and we call people a murderer or a thief, or, you know, or a rapist, or um, because often we're defining a whole person's life, particularly in murder, we're defining a whole person's life by an action that probably took a few minutes. And so I prefer to be really alive to those kinds of labels because a lot of the people I meet in prison are very distressed. So firstly, they're distressed or they're traumatized from the things that have happened to them, which is the context we talk about. But people don't lose all their faculties. Does the fact that I took someone's life eradicate every single other thing that I did in my life that may have been helpful or contributing well to society? So really interesting because it's so much more complex than the black and white kind of media portrayal.
Yeah, and I think it kind of I guess the answer to that is determined based on how far you go back. Sort of like the notion like hurt people hurt people. If you go further back enough, the people who we see as the perpetrators are often the victims at some point. So it's kind of just like we're pick and choosing whether we want to call them a victim of sexual assault or if later on in life we want to call them that rapists
Mm.
because there is a huge correlation there as well. Obviously, in not all cases, but as I was saying earlier, I don't think it's fair that we sort of pick and choose that one person is defined as a murderer or that one person is defined as a rapist, when really
Yes.
like we would have defined them as something else.
Yeah, I think we all have to be defined as human, and the world never promised us that shit wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
And while this, as I said, there is a whole there's a whole other conversation around the effect on victims. But as again, I prefer to talk about what is the injury, loss, or harm. What actually is the injury, loss, or harm, and who sustained it, and how are we going to repair it?
Yeah.
And so I suppose I'm asking you to sort of think about or to comment on when we look at justice from that angle, what happens, what could be different.
I mean, obviously it's a very difficult question. But I think that it all starts with education. When I was doing my dissertation, and both my dissertations actually, on my one on institutionalized racism, a lot of the issues we were seeing to do with stop and search and it being very biased and directed towards people of color, even though the majority of the time it was white men who were seen with drugs a lot more than black men, but black men were being stopped at a disproportionately high rate, still are. Um, I found that it was really just the internal unconscious biases they had. Um, and just like we wouldn't want to label those specific police officers as racist, we don't want to label people of color as criminals or drug dealers. So I think the education aspect, figuring out what your unconscious biases are, where did they come from, also taking the blame out of it. It's not your fault. The media and the colonial history of England has made it very difficult for people to not be biased. Um, and I found in the similar vein in my second dissertation on institutionalized misogyny. There was a really heartbreaking case on Sarah Abraham, I believe her name was, and she had a very brutal sexual assault, and her trauma was misidentified as lying. So every single piece of evidence she gave, whether it changed a little bit in her behavior, it was all dissected and understood to be, oh, she's lying, or she's doing this for attention. But really, if the police officers or the investigators had more education on what trauma looks like and how women respond to sexual assault, it wouldn't have been seen that way. So I guess in terms of stopping further harm. Um, is education, and also the root cause is also education, if that makes sense. It's Layla Abraham, not Sarah Abraham.
That's such a really good point, and maybe we'll sort of turn a corner into that because when you're telling your story, and you're now in the field of the law, and everything that you say is being scrutinized or picked apart, and as you say, then we have to look at our unconscious biases, because it's not a scientific, it's not a scientific process. And yet the work I do with people when I'm using the dialogue roadmap, if I'm listening to someone's story in any setting whatsoever, where a person starts with how they present and what they want me to hear at the beginning invariably weaves in and out of all sorts of places and changes and morphs. And those people are not lying. They're not lying. They're going on a very human journey.
Exactly, and it's the same with memory as well. There is actually so much evidence to suggest that our memory is so malleable. It genuinely changes. There have also been studies where people are taken in and shown photos of them in a hot air balloon and said, "Oh, do you remember this being on a hot air balloon?" And at the beginning, they're like, "No, I've never went on a hot air balloon," and they never had. But then I think they bring in parents and they're like, "No, you did," blah, blah, blah. And at the end, they have this full memory of them being in a hot air
Mm.
balloon. So, I mean, the way that the criminal justice system, from the very beginning, from police interviews to being in court, um, I mean, your memories kind of will change and your attitudes and your feelings will change, and that is just human nature. But if we start to interpret that as people being malicious or lying, then we have a whole different perception of them.
And I think the point is that what you're really, bringing out to light is that it's very complex and that we're trying to use very black and white systems, very black and white, evidence based, sometimes balance of probability systems to do something that's very complex. Because clearly, we don't want somebody to have their freedom taken away or to be labelled who didn't do it. I mean, and there's a huge amount of that, a huge amount. I mean, I sit with a lot of innocence protesters. I'm not there to say to believe or disbelieve somebody in the work I'm doing. So, if I understand you, there's a lot of complexity here, and we need a lot more. Well, I think you said it, education. There needs to be, we need to never stop examining and educating ourselves as we learn more about neurodivergence, as we learn more about how people operate, what people are exposed to, what the general sort of echo chambers of our society are telling us, are bouncing back at us. All this has to be taken into account.
Yeah, I think that really sort of sums it up because I mean, when people commit crimes, that could be influenced by like the most complex set of situations or intentions. But then when we judge them for it, as you said, it's just black and white. How can we use you're either guilty or not guilty, such a black and white sort of playing field for someone's whole life?
Yeah.
How can you give such a non-complex solution to something that's so, so, so complex? It's really just failing people individually, I feel.
Yeah. I mean, when I work in prisons, one of the first things that I say, in order to bring relief to the situation, because, I show up, nobody knows, there's a journey of trust to go on. Yeah, but one of the first things I say is, don't worry, I know I'm not meeting the real you. I'm just meeting a version of you that's trying to survive a brutal system. And that often brings some relief because I'm recognizing that the version of a person that shows up might not be all of them.
Yeah, I think that's a really lovely thing to say, actually.
Yeah, and how do I get to know you and how do you get to know me? So when we separate the crime from the context, the victim from the perpetrator, and we're giving a very powerful message in society,
Hmm.
which for me is there are all these authorities that know best, all these experts that know best, but we don't trust that the population has any clue of how to display goodwill, how to bring compassion, how to negotiate with each other, how to repair harm together, because every time that harm is repaired, well or badly, by somebody else, we're disempowering people.
Completely agree. Yeah,
And
I
that comes back
completely
to
agree.
education again.
Yeah, and also just how to have conversations, education even at that like low level point, teaching like empathy training. I know that's been
Mm,
implemented in some schools. So important. I mean, how to have conversations. And I think if you think about what the end goal is, if it's really to reduce crime, then let's actually think about how to do that because as we've discovered, prisons aren't doing that. Dehumanizing people isn't doing that. It's conversations and it's education, and it's really uncovering the root cause.
absolutely. But maybe the root cause is too terrifying.
Maybe, maybe.
Maybe there's something about the root cause being too terrifying. I'll go a bit further. Too terrifying for people that hold power that may have to give up some of that power. So, you're clearly very passionate about this, and clearly you've put your heart and soul into these dissertations. And, that's not about the dissertation, it's about all the research and the work that goes into it. And then somehow mediation and becoming a mediator has also captivated you. So I suppose when you look at your dissertations and you look at the work and the studies you've done around the justice system, and forgetting the public facing side of it, the internal doings of, that's police and court systems and legal systems and Crown Prosecution Service, all of that, probation, where would you put mediation into those systems?
Honestly, I'd put mediation throughout the whole process. As we were talking about the root cause, we might not be able to go all the way to the root cause. We might not sort of have that power, but we can definitely dissect every single section of the criminal justice system from the crime to the arrest to the investigation to the courtroom to the prisons and so forth. And I think if we have more conversations with everyone involved, why did you choose to arrest that person? Why did you stop and search this person? And have these open conversations without any judgment whatsoever. I think people will learn a lot more about people. We'll learn a lot more about why things are happening and maybe where the injustice came in. Same thing with the interviews, why did you ask this question? And to the interviewee, how did you feel when you were asked that question? Maybe in an interview, a side of someone came out that they're not really proud of, or maybe a side to someone came out that doesn't come out often. As you said, when you visit the prisons, you're only seeing one side of them, maybe a side that doesn't come out often. And we can ask what sort of questions made that side of you come out, for example. And I think by stopping and having conversations with every single person at every single critical point, we'll learn more about the process and what can change. But I think it's so heavily policed now, for lack of better words, that it's so to the book that we've taken the humanity out of it. I think we need to bring the humanity back into it, figure out sort of what's going wrong and how people are actually feeling, because at the end of the day, feelings are a huge part of this whole process. I mean, feelings are, for the most part, why things, why people sometimes commit crimes in the first place. So I think just going back and really dissecting it, even if we can't fix it, at least we'll understand more.
That is such a genius response. I mean, it really is.
Thank
I spend
you.
a lot of time in the system, and that is a genius response. Because we are motivated by our feelings, no matter how much we believe logic and rationality and all of that. No matter how much we believe that, at the end, we are motivated to do things by how we feel about them. And I mean, you could check this statistic because I don't have any kind of research backup, but I believe that when there is a murder, in 75% of cases, the victim and the perpetrator knew each other
Hmm.
before that took place. So, which implies there was some kind of relationship, toxic or dysfunctional or whatever, but there was some kind of relationship that escalated into that. Um, And so when I hear you say that we could dissect, I mean, I had this vision of an amazing study of perhaps taking people who've got long-term jail sentences who would be willing to go back through with all the people. It's done now, it's done,
Yeah.
but to go back with the arresting officers who may have retired by now, and literally relive the whole thing with being witnessed and observed by people who can interpret this stuff. I mean, I just think your answer was genius
Thank you
because,
so
as you
much.
said, might not change much, but we would learn a huge amount
Hmm.
to bring back some of our humanity into it. God, I love that.
Thank you.
I really love that. So, yeah, so I'm still blown away by that, the possibilities there of doing that as a long-term study, because I know there are people in prison who would be glad to go back over it. I mean, I know somebody who's serving a full 30 years before he can ever get any parole, and he's 15 or 16 years in now, and he had a lot of problems being in groups or being around people. And it took him 15 or 16 years and some very deep work that we did. And he said, "Oh, I know what it is now. I'm still in shock from the court case.
Oh my gosh.
I'm still in shock." And so every time I sit with a group of people, I'm reliving that guilty verdict.
Yeah.
And that's 15, 16 years. So, there's a lot, I think there are lots of people that would do such a study. So, look, we've come to the end of our time together, which has been absolutely delightful. And I'm going to follow you because you're going to do amazing things. You are just going to do
Thank you
amazing
so
things.
much.
You heard it here first. um, uh, I've got a sort of surprise question, if that's okay.
Okay. Yes, go for it.
So, if I were to give you the keys to the justice system and you could make one change immediately, what would you do?
Ooh, it's a difficult one, and not to repeat too much of what I said earlier, but probably empathy training. Just real proper education from a young age, um, about, I guess, England's history, the British Empire, why we have such deeply ingrained racial biases and patriarchal values. And then I guess by the time people get to the criminal justice system, they'll just be more informed, and then continuing that training. I don't know how much it would help, but I would definitely say that it would make some sort of difference. There would at least be a little bit more understanding and a bit more humanity behind the decisions we make, and hopefully would save a lot of innocent people. Yeah.
Really? Yeah, thank you. Wow, what an amazing episode. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much for having me. It's been such an honor.
Take care.
Thank you.